Elizabeth, we need to discuss the living arrangements now that your father is gone. Patricia's voice carried that familiar tone of false concern mixed with barely concealed authority as she approached me in the kitchen where I was arranging funeral flowers. The house was full of mourners paying their respects to Dad, but my stepmother had clearly decided this was the perfect time for family business. I continued cutting stems and placing white lilies in the crystal vase Dad had given me for my college graduation. The same vase Patricia had tried to convince him was too expensive for a stepdaughter's gift 8 years ago. My hands remained steady despite the conversation I knew was coming. Of course, Patricia. Though I think today might not be the most appropriate time for practical matters. She smoothed her black dress and checked her reflection in the kitchen window. Even at Dad's funeral, Patricia managed to look like she was attending a charity gala rather than mourning her husband of 12 years. Her makeup was flawless, her hair professionally styled, her jewelry expensive but tasteful. The picture of a grieving widow who somehow looked better than most people did on their best days. I disagree, she said, leaning against the granite counter Dad had installed when I was in high school. Delay only makes these conversations more difficult. We're adults here. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see my half-siblings holding court in the living room. Austin, 22, and fresh out of college with a business degree he barely earned, was explaining investment strategies to Dad's old friends from the engineering firm. Melanie, 24, and perpetually between jobs, was describing her latest plans to start a lifestyle blog to anyone who would listen. Both of them had inherited Patricia's talent for presenting confidence in place of competence. Both had also inherited her belief that the world owed them everything they wanted simply because they wanted it. What specifically did you want to discuss? I asked, though I already knew. Patricia had been dropping hints for months about how expensive it was to maintain Dad's house. How much more practical it would be for everyone if living arrangements were optimized. Well, she began, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to say something cruel. This house is quite large for one person, and with Austin planning to get married next year, and Melanie needing a stable base while she establishes her career. I placed another lily in the vase, taking my time to get the arrangement just right. Dad had taught me patience during the 3 years he battled cancer. Patience with insurance companies, with doctors, with well-meaning relatives who offered advice about treatments they didn't understand. Most importantly, patience with Patricia, who spent those 3 years positioning herself and her children for the inevitable. Are you suggesting I move out? I asked calmly. I'm suggesting we be realistic about everyone's needs. Patricia pulled out one of the kitchen bar stools and sat down, clearly settling in for a longer conversation. You have your career, your independence. Austin and Melanie are still finding their footing. This house would give them the stability they need. My career, as if being a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms was some kind of hobby I could relocate anywhere. As if the 15 years I'd spent building my practice, the clients who depended on my expertise, the junior partners I mentored, were all easily transferable. I see, I said, moving to the next vase. And where exactly would I be finding this career-focused independence? There are lovely condominiums downtown, much more suitable for a single professional woman, less maintenance, better security, closer to your office. I almost smiled at the word suitable. Patricia had strong opinions about what was suitable for various types of people. Stepdaughters, apparently, were suitable for downtown condominiums rather than family homes where they'd grown up. That's an interesting perspective, I replied. Have you discussed this with Austin and Melanie? Of course. They're both very concerned about your well-being. Living alone in such a large house can't be healthy for someone your age. Someone my age. I was 35. Hardly a spinster requiring intervention. But in Patricia's worldview, unmarried women over 30 were objects of pity who needed guidance from more successful wives and mothers. Through the doorway, I watched Austin gesture expansively while explaining something to Mr. Henderson from Dad's old firm. Austin had Dad's height and Patricia's confidence, but none of Dad's substance. He'd graduated college with a 2.3 GPA and no job prospects, but Patricia had convinced Dad that Austin just needed time to find his passion. Melanie was showing her phone to a group of church ladies, probably displaying her latest Instagram posts. She'd been finding herself for 6 years since high school, starting and abandoning various creative pursuits whenever they required actual work. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I'm quite comfortable here. This is my home. Patricia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The artificial sweetness hardened into something more recognizable. Elizabeth, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. This house belonged to your father, and now it belongs to his family. I am his family. You're his stepdaughter. Austin and Melanie are his blood. There it was. The distinction Patricia had been carefully avoiding for 12 years while she needed Dad's support for her children's endless expenses. When Austin needed college tuition, I was family. When Melanie needed a car, I was family. When Patricia wanted expensive renovations, I was family. But now that Dad was gone, I was just the stepdaughter who needed to make room for the real children. I see, I said quietly, and you've determined that blood relation supersedes 15 years of residence here. I've determined that practical considerations matter more than sentiment. Austin needs space for his fiancée when they marry. Melanie needs a quiet environment to focus on building her business. You need independence and the freedom to build your own life. My own life. As if I hadn't been building my own life for years while also caring for Dad through his illness, managing his medical care, handling his legal affairs, and watching Patricia systematically position herself and her children as his primary beneficiaries. That's very thoughtful of you to consider everyone's needs so carefully, I said. I assume you've also considered the practical aspects of this arrangement. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Details can be worked out. The important thing is that we all understand what's best for the family. I finished the second flower arrangement and turned to face her directly. Patricia, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember 3 years ago when Dad updated his will after his first cancer diagnosis? Her carefully composed expression flickered. Vaguely. He was very sick, making arrangements. He was very thorough, actually. He spent months with his attorney making sure everything was properly documented and legally sound. Elizabeth, I don't think this is the time to discuss legal technicalities. When would be a better time? After I've moved to one of those suitable downtown condominiums. Patricia stood up from the bar stool, her posture becoming more rigid. I think you're being deliberately difficult about a very straightforward family matter. Family matters often involve legal technicalities, don't they? Especially when they concern property ownership and inheritance rights. The house was your father's. Now it belongs to his widow and children. I nodded slowly. His widow and children. That's an interesting way to phrase it. Before Patricia could respond, Austin appeared in the kitchen doorway. Mom, people are starting to leave. Should we do the speech now? Patricia glanced at me, then back at Austin. Yes, I think it's time. I followed them into the living room where the remaining guests had gathered. Perhaps 30 people, mostly Dad's colleagues from the engineering firm, neighbors, and church friends. Patricia positioned herself near the fireplace, with Austin and Melanie flanking her like bodyguards. "Thank you all for being here today to honor Robert's memory," Patricia began, her voice carrying the perfect note of dignified grief. "He would have been so moved by the love and support you've shown our family during this difficult time." Our family. I noticed how smoothly she positioned herself and her children as the primary mourners while I stood apart near the kitchen doorway. "As we begin the process of healing and moving forward," Patricia continued, "we want you to know that Robert's legacy will live on through the values he instilled in Austin and Melanie. His children will carry his memory in everything they do." His children. Again, the careful exclusion wrapped in seemingly inclusive language. "Robert was a man who believed in family above all else," Patricia said, her voice growing stronger. "He worked hard to provide for us, to give us a foundation we could build on. This house, his life's work, everything he accomplished was for his family." I watched the faces of Dad's friends and colleagues. Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen from next door kept glancing at me with concern. They all knew I'd been the one caring for Dad during his illness, managing his affairs, making sure his wishes were respected. "Now," Patricia continued, "we have some difficult decisions to make about maintaining Robert's legacy. The practical realities of keeping his memory alive while moving forward as a family." She paused, looking directly at me. "This house has been the center of our family for so many years. Austin and Melanie grew up here, and it's important that they continue to have that foundation as they build their own families." I saw where this was going. A public announcement designed to pressure me into compliance through social expectation. "Elizabeth has been wonderful," Patricia said, her tone suggesting charity rather than gratitude. "She's been like a daughter to Robert, and we're so grateful for everything she's done. But we all understand that it's time for her to spread her wings, to build her own life independent of the family nest." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The manipulation was transparent to anyone who knew our family dynamics. "So," Patricia said, her voice taking on a tone of finality, "this house belongs to my real children now. Elizabeth will be transitioning to her own place, giving Austin and Melanie the space they need to honor their father's memory." The room fell quiet. Austin nodded approvingly. Melanie smiled, that self-satisfied expression she perfected since childhood whenever she got something she wanted. "Pack your things and leave by Sunday," Patricia concluded, looking at me with the expression of someone who just solved a complex problem. It's what Robert would have wanted. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dad's friends and colleagues stared at their hands, at the floor, anywhere but at the family drama unfolding in front of them. I walked calmly across the living room to the kitchen, opened the drawer where Dad kept important documents, and retrieved a manila folder I'd placed there that morning. The same drawer where he'd always kept insurance papers, utility bills, and legal documents that needed to be easily accessible. Returning to the living room, I placed the folder on the coffee table in front of Patricia. The gesture was quiet, simple, completely without drama. "Before everyone leaves," I said calmly, "there's something you should see." Patricia looked at the folder suspiciously. "Elizabeth, what is this?" I opened the folder and pulled out the top document. "This is the property deed for this house, updated 3 years ago when Dad revised his estate planning." Patricia's confident expression began to waver. "I don't understand what you're trying to prove." "The deed shows current ownership of the property." I held up the document so the guests could see the official county seal and legal formatting. Would you like me to read the owner's name? The room was completely silent now. Austin stopped his self-satisfied nodding. Melanie's smile disappeared. Elizabeth Margaret Harrison. I read aloud. Sole owner as of March 15th, 3 years ago. Patricia snatched the document from my hands, her eyes scanning the legal language frantically. This can't be right. Robert owned this house. Dad transferred ownership to me when he was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, I explained to the room. His attorney recommended it as part of comprehensive estate planning to avoid probate complications and ensure property security. Patricia was still staring at the deed, her face cycling through expressions of confusion, anger, and panic. But he didn't tell me. He told me he was protecting his most important investment, I said quietly. This house and the person who had actually been taking care of it. Austin stepped forward, his earlier confidence completely gone. This has to be some kind of mistake. I pulled out another document. This is the certificate of title transfer, signed by Dad and notarized by his attorney. Would you like to see the attorney's contact information to verify authenticity? Melanie finally found her voice. But Mom said we were inheriting the house. Your mother made an assumption, I replied. The house wasn't part of Dad's estate because he'd already transferred ownership 3 years ago. Patricia was reading the deed more carefully now, and I could see the moment she understood what she was looking at. Legal language was clear when you took time to actually read it. Elizabeth, she said, her voice much smaller than it had been during her speech, surely we can work something out. Robert intended for all of us to benefit from this property. Did he? I asked. Because when he transferred ownership to me, he was very specific about his reasoning. Would you like me to share what he told his attorney? The guests were watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Mr. Henderson had pulled out his phone, probably texting his wife about the drama unfolding at Robert Harrison's funeral reception. Dad told his attorney that he was transferring the house to the person who had demonstrated the greatest responsibility and commitment to the family. I continued. The person who had been managing household finances, coordinating his medical care, and ensuring that family obligations were met. Patricia's perfectly composed facade was cracking. I was dealing with grief, supporting the children through a difficult time. You were planning their futures, I corrected. Which is understandable, but Dad was planning too. I pulled out a third document. This is a letter Dad wrote to me when he signed the property transfer. Would you like me to read it? Elizabeth, please. Patricia said quickly. Let's discuss this privately. I think we've moved past private discussions, I replied. You made your announcement publicly. The response should be equally public. I unfolded the letter Dad had written in his careful engineer's handwriting. Elizabeth, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and someone has challenged your ownership of our home. I want everyone to understand why I made this decision. The room was dead silent now. Even Austin and Melanie had stopped their whispering. For 15 years, Elizabeth has been the stability in our family. When I married Patricia, Elizabeth welcomed her and her children with grace and maturity beyond her years. When I got sick, Elizabeth managed every aspect of my care while maintaining her demanding career. When bills needed paying, Elizabeth paid them. When decisions needed making, Elizabeth made them. Patricia had gone very pale. The letter was destroying the narrative she'd constructed about family hierarchy and blood relations. Austin and Melanie are good children, I continued reading, but they have never demonstrated the responsibility or commitment that homeownership requires. Patricia has many wonderful qualities, but practical management is not among them. Elizabeth has proven herself to be the true keeper of our family's foundation. I folded the letter carefully. He ended by saying that he hoped his decision would be respected, and that anyone who couldn't accept it was welcome to find alternative living arrangements. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia sank into the nearest chair, looking like someone who'd just been told their lottery ticket was a fake. Austin stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't fair. We grew up here too." "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "You did grow up here, in the house where I've lived for 15 years, paying property taxes, maintenance costs, and utilities, while you focused on your education and career development." "But we're family," Melanie protested. "Yes, we are, which is why you're welcome to continue living here under the same arrangement you've always had, as my guests." Patricia's head snapped up. "Your guests?" "Patricia, you just announced that I should pack my things and leave by Sunday. You declared that this house belongs to your real children now. But since I own the house, I think we need to revisit those living arrangements. The legal training that had made me a successful attorney was serving me well now. Keep emotion out of it. Focus on facts. Let the other side reveal their true motivations through their own words. I have a proposal," I continued. "Austin, you're welcome to continue living here rent-free until your wedding, as originally planned. Melanie, you can stay until you establish stable employment and can afford your own place. Patricia." I paused, looking at my stepmother who had just tried to evict me from my own home at my father's funeral. "Patricia, you have until the end of the month to decide whether you can accept living in a house owned by your stepdaughter or whether you'd prefer to find one of those suitable downtown condominiums you mentioned." The guests began quietly gathering their coats and purses. The entertainment was over, and they clearly wanted to escape before the family drama escalated further. Mrs. Chen approached me as she prepared to leave. "Elizabeth, your father would be proud of how you handled this." Mr. Henderson shook my hand. "If you need anything, legal advice, references, anything at all, please call." One by one, Dad's friends and colleagues offered their support before leaving. It was clear who they saw as Robert Harrison's true successor. After the last guest left, the four of us stood in the living room that had just witnessed Patricia's public humiliation. The flower arrangements I'd made that morning looked strangely cheerful in the aftermath of the confrontation. "Elizabeth," Patricia said finally, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think there has been," I replied. "You were very clear about your position. I'm just explaining mine." Austin was still studying the property deed like it might change if he stared at it long enough. "This doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't Dad tell us he was transferring the house?" "He did tell you," I said, 3 years ago, when he called a family meeting to discuss his estate planning. You were busy with college, and Melanie was traveling in Europe. Neither of you attended." Melanie's face flushed. "We didn't know it was important. Dad's legal affairs weren't important enough to interrupt your spring break plans." Patricia stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Elizabeth, we need to discuss this reasonably." "We tried reasonable discussion in the kitchen," I reminded her. "You informed me that I needed to pack my things and leave by Sunday to make room for your real children. How exactly would you like to make that reasonable?" I was emotional, dealing with grief. "You were strategic, positioning your children for maximum benefit. Unfortunately, you didn't verify property ownership before making your announcement." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden Dad and I had planted together over the years. The roses he'd helped me choose, the fruit trees we planted for privacy, the vegetables patch where he taught me about soil composition and drainage. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to face them. Austin, your wedding plans don't change. You can continue living here until then. Melanie, you have 6 months to find stable employment and your own housing. Patricia, you have 30 days to decide whether you want to live peacefully in my house or find alternative arrangements. Your house, Patricia repeated bitterly. My house, I confirmed. The house Dad legally transferred to me because he trusted me to preserve what he built. Austin was still processing the implications. But what about inheritance? The will? The will covers Dad's personal property, savings, and investments. The house was already mine, so it wasn't part of his estate. I pulled out one final document. Here's the breakdown of Dad's actual estate. Patricia inherits his savings and retirement accounts. You and Melanie inherit his investment portfolio. I inherit his personal property and continue owning the house I've owned for 3 years. Patricia snatched the estate summary and read it quickly. Her face went through several expressions as she realized that Dad's liquid assets, while comfortable, weren't nearly enough to buy another house like this one. This is manipulative, she said finally. Robert was sick, probably not thinking clearly. Dad was an engineer, Patricia. He thought clearly right up until the end. His attorney will confirm that he was completely competent when he made these decisions. I'm calling a lawyer, Austin announced. That's your right, I replied. But you should know that Dad's attorney specifically documented his reasoning for the property transfer. He anticipated that there might be challenges. I gathered the documents back into their folder. The attorney's contact information is in Dad's desk if you want to verify anything I've told you. Melanie was crying now, probably realizing that her comfortable lifestyle was about to change dramatically. This isn't what Dad would have wanted. Melanie, Dad lived with his decision for 3 years. If he'd wanted to change it, he had plenty of opportunities. Patricia was staring at the floor, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem to solve, I said quietly. 3 hours ago, you told me to pack my things and leave by Sunday. You declared that this house belongs to your real children. You made your position very clear. I was upset, grieving. You were calculating, just like you calculated that Dad would leave everything to you and your children, just like you calculated that I would quietly accept whatever arrangement you decided was suitable. I walked toward the stairs leading to my bedroom. I'm going to rest now. It's been a long day. Feel free to use the kitchen if you need anything. Elizabeth, wait. Patricia called. We need to resolve this. I paused at the bottom of the stairs. Patricia, there's nothing to resolve. I own this house. Dad intended for me to own this house. You attempted to evict me at his funeral. Those are the facts. But we're family, she said desperately. Yes, we are. Which is why I'm not evicting you immediately like you tried to do to me. You have 30 days to adjust to the new reality. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, leaving Patricia, Austin, and Melanie to contemplate the difference between assumed authority and actual legal ownership. From my bedroom window, I could see neighbors' houses where I'd lived my entire adult life. The community where I'd built relationships, established roots, created the stability Dad had valued so highly. Patricia had calculated that grief and social pressure would force me to accept her version of family hierarchy. She'd assumed that being the biological mother gave her authority over the stepdaughter. She'd been wrong about everything except my commitment to preserving what Dad had built. Over the next 3 weeks, the household dynamics shifted dramatically. Austin spent most of his time at his fiancée's apartment, avoiding the tension. Melanie alternated between sulking and making half-hearted attempts to find employment. Patricia maintained icy politeness while clearly hoping I would change my mind about the ownership arrangement. On day 28 of her 30-day deadline, Patricia knocked on my bedroom door. "Elizabeth, may I come in?" I was reading case files for Monday's court appearance, but I set them aside. "Of course." She entered tentatively, no longer carrying herself with the authority she displayed at Dad's funeral. "I found an apartment downtown. One of those suitable condominiums I mentioned. I hope it works well for you. Elizabeth, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to assume that the house would automatically be mine. I was wrong to try to evict you, and I was wrong to dismiss your role in this family." I studied her carefully. The apology sounded genuine, but Patricia had always been skilled at saying what people wanted to hear when it served her purposes. "I appreciate that, Patricia. Would you consider allowing me to stay? I could pay rent, contribute to household expenses." I was quiet for a long moment. The practical side of me recognized that Patricia's rent payments would help with the considerable costs of maintaining the house. But the protective side remembered her standing in the living room declaring that the house belonged to her real children. "Patricia, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If our situations were reversed, if you owned this house and I had tried to evict you at Dad's funeral, would you be offering me a chance to stay as a tenant?" She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she shook her head. "Probably not." "Then you understand my position." "I do." She stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Robert was right to trust you with this house. You've been a better daughter to him than I was a wife, and a better family member than Austin and Melanie have been siblings." After she left, I returned to my case files. Monday's court appearance was a complex property dispute, the kind of case that required careful attention to legal documentation and ownership rights. The same skills that had protected my own home were now serving my clients. Patricia moved out 2 days later with minimal drama. Austin stayed until his wedding 6 months later, maintaining polite distance, but gradually warming to the reality that I wasn't the villain in his family's story. Melanie found a job and an apartment, discovering that independence could be empowering rather than terrifying. A year later, I received a letter from Patricia. She'd settled into her downtown condominium and was volunteering at a literacy center, finding purpose in helping others rather than managing family dynamics. She thanked me for forcing her to build an independent life and admitted that she'd been trying to recreate her first marriage where financial security came through managing her husband's assets rather than earning her own. Austin and his wife visited regularly, bringing their newborn daughter to the house where 4 generations of the family had now lived. The baby's nursery was in Austin's old room, surrounded by the same walls where Dad had read bedtime stories and taught basic math concepts. Melanie called every few weeks, updating me on her job and her new relationship. She discovered that she actually enjoyed working when the job matched her interests, and that earning her own money felt better than depending on family support. The house remained exactly as Dad had intended, a foundation for family, maintained by the person who understood both its practical and emotional value. The roses bloomed each spring, the fruit trees produced their annual harvest, and the garden provided the same peace it had offered Dad during his final years. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be displaced by people who mistake entitlement for ownership. Dad had spent 3 years ensuring that his home would be protected by the person who truly understood its worth. In the end, Patricia's assumption about blood relations versus chosen family had been her downfall. Dad had chosen his successor based on demonstrated commitment rather than biological connection. The legal documents I placed on the coffee table that day weren't just proof of ownership. They were proof that love and loyalty create stronger bonds than genetics and manipulation. The house stands as Dad intended, owned by the daughter who earned it through 15 years of responsibility, protected by the same legal expertise that now helps other families navigate complex property disputes. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let entitled people take what they haven't earned. And when new neighbors ask about the beautiful Victorian house with the amazing garden, I tell them it's been in my family for over 20 years. Because family, I've learned, is defined by commitment and care, not by blood and assumption.